welcome to the Passenger Seat Podcast, a podcast designed to fill your passenger seat with chat about classic cars, all recorded from my 1968 Morris Minor Peggy. I'm Becca, and today I'm going to tell you all about a book that I've been reading lately and give you kind of a little bit of a book review. So the book I'm going to tell you about is Driven by Crime by Crispian Besley, and I picked it up at the NEC Classic Motor Show in November. Spotted it there, and the title is called Driven to Crime, and I teach a module called Deviancy in Pleasure and Leisure at my job, where I deliver a criminology degree, and in that module we look at kind of how the things people choose to do with their spare time and what they enjoy taking part in for fun can either increase or decrease their likelihood of committing crimes. And this is linked to the idea that some form of social deviancy for everyone is inevitable, and the idea that perhaps partaking in something that is socially kind of abnormative or deviant for fun that doesn't harm anyone can reduce your chances of going on to do more serious crimes. So it's an area in terms of criminality that I find particularly interesting, and I really enjoyed drawing the module up, and I really enjoy delivering that module. One of my favourite sessions in that module is actually about car culture and car meets and cruising and stuff like that, and how that compares to the classic scene. Sparks up lots of really interesting discussions, and my students always find it really interesting to compare the images of both of those kind of groups, the more modern modified stuff, with the kind of classic and historic scene, and how their public perceptions are so widely different, but the reality is often a little bit closer than I think either side wants to admit. So I thought this would be quite an interesting book to get hold of and to have a look through. So Jamie very kindly picked me up a copy over that weekend because I didn't have a chance to go back and grab one myself. And I've been kind of looking through it and seeing if it fits into this perspective that I've got for the module, or whether it's offering kind of an interesting challenge to that. So in today's episode I'm going to talk a little bit about what the book looks like, play about with some of the case studies that the book offers by applying some criminological theory to it, so something a little bit different, and kind of give you a bit of an idea about what the book's about if you're interested in getting yourself a copy. So with a title like Driven to Crime, you might be expecting a lot of criminal stories about individuals who have, as a result of motorsport and things like that, turned to crime. And those are featured, but it isn't solely that. The book is made up of a collection of kind of varying lengths of relatively short descriptive sections that describe a crime or an individual's kind of backstory and then their crime, and some of these crimes are directly linked to motorsport, and some of these crimes are just a case of this person was involved in motorsport and this is a crime that they were linked to. And it's an interesting perspective regardless, because it does suggest that the lifestyle that's attached to motorsport can be quite a wild and unexpected one, with elements such as kind of crime ending up interwoven, and it makes for some interesting reads. The length of these sections is kind of relative to perhaps the interest that's going to be attached to it. So for example, the Colin Chapman and John DeLorean chapter is really quite a big one, with lots of detail, because it kind of gives you an overview of both of their histories up until the point, and then kind of what happened with the fraud and things like that. Whereas other chapters are much shorter and kind of give you a much briefer overview. And there's also some little text boxes that are kind of even shorter sections that have a vague link to the main chapter that's going on. So that's kind of how it's broken down. It makes it quite easy to dip in and out of. I found it quite enjoyable to do that. I found that their coverage of perhaps one of the most serious cases, that of David Blakely and Ruth Ellis, was quite sympathetic. It can be a case that's very easy to sensationalise, and given my line of work, I like to see examples where that's avoided. So I felt that that was quite an appropriate coverage of that case. Besides the Ruth Ellis case and one other, there is a lack of coverage of women, but that could be down to multiple factors. If we look at criminological factors, there's plenty of theories that explain why women are less likely to commit crime. And if we look at motorsport, there's a lot of issues with women being able to get to the top of that sport, despite the fact it being one of the sports where women are supposed to be able to compete equally. So that does rather limit the pool. But the two cases that were involved, obviously Ruth Ellis is being a particularly high profile one, and then one case was that of a woman who was in motorsport herself, but the crime that happened to her, a kidnapping, wasn't in any way all that relevant to her later motorsport career. The book starts with an introduction, and there is a quote there from Mike Lawrence that talks about how individuals who are committing crimes outside of motor racing in order to partake in motorsport are often the ones that are the most sticklers for the rules in the actual races. And this immediately started me thinking about theories and kind of gave me this idea for this podcast. Because there's a theory by Cloward and Olin that's to do with delinquent gangs, and this idea that these young people seek out illegitimate structures of status and different value goals when they struggle to achieve them through legitimate means. And so it sounds to me like that example that's provided in that quote is an example of these people kind of seeking out a different structure and having to get into that structure through illegitimate means, the use of perhaps money laundering or fraud or whatever it might be, to get into the very costly sport that is motorsport. It's a bit of a stretch of that use of theory, but I'm always encouraging my students to be imaginative and innovative with their application of theory. So I'm going to say that it's an appropriate one, and we'll carry on with the examples of the case studies that the book's provided and see what we get from those. So our first case is that of Simon Atkinson, perhaps not a household name, but he raced between 2010 and 2017 sporadically on both the UK and European stages of endurance and GT racing. He was racing alongside some pretty notable names, and even partner drove with some pretty accomplished individuals in the sport at the time, which in itself perhaps not a huge red flag, but Simon was a self-described provincial chicken farmer from Hertfordshire. So wondering how he was able to afford Lamborghinis and stuff like that might cross your mind. And he did have a legitimate means of accessing that. His family company, the chicken farm, had some stakeholders who were interested in investing in his racing and acting as sponsors. But Simon decided that that wasn't for him, and that it would be easier and cheaper to kind of involved some false invoices for the family farm in his paying for his hobby. So he was sending off invoices for lots of other things to do with being able to pay for his motorsport. And unfortunately for him, HMRC were conducting some investigations regarding money laundering, and that's when they found a load of the false invoices. And these false invoices totaled to around £450,000 of tax fraud, which sounds like an awful lot, and it definitely is, because he was paying for whole brand new racing spec Lamborghinis from factory to compete in through these false invoices. So why would he do it? Well, we could apply rational choice theory. He clearly didn't think that the risk was all that high of him being caught. People were perhaps getting away with tax fraud around him, and he thought, yeah, maybe I can get away with it too. And the reward of both being able to potentially win some money in these races, but also the reward of the thrill of taking part in these races, perhaps is what spurred him on. We could also apply arousal-seeking theory, which is the idea that everyone has a kind of optimal level of thrill and arousal that they are seeking from their everyday lives, and we're all kind of trying to avoid boredom, but also avoid too high a stakes through anxiety. And this would suggest why perhaps the thrill of racing itself wasn't enough, and the kind of legitimate means of getting his sponsorship and money from his family farm stakeholders wasn't of interest to Simon. So that's our first case study. We're now going a little bit further back in time to the story of Kay Don. Kay Don was a pretty well-respected motorbike and car racer back in the 1920s and 30s. And in 1934, he headed over to the Isle of Man to take part in a race that was happening over there, that takes place on closed public roads for cars at the time. Obviously, Isle of Man's pretty familiar with that. Lots of races taking place on closed public roads over there. He had done a test during the day on the closed public roads of his MG Magnet and had noticed an issue with the brakes and reported it to his mechanic Francis Taylor. Francis Taylor did some work on the vehicle and reported that evening to Kay Don that the brakes had been sorted, and they decided to go out and test those brakes on the now publicly open roads of the Isle of Man with no headlights. So the lack of headlights and things like that is probably enough of an illegal issue. However, unfortunately, Kay Don came round a corner and crashed into a taxi cab, and the taxi and its occupants were relatively unharmed, but the wheel came off of the Magnet and it overturned, and both Kay Don and Francis Taylor were injured, and Francis Taylor later died of his injuries. So Kay Don faced charges from the coroner's court for manslaughter due to his negligence in his driving. He made some arguments that it was part of occupational culture, and that Taylor Francis knew the risks when he got in the car, and he had been kind of as much a part of the decision as Kay, and also suggested that Francis Taylor had made some comments about Kay Don before his death that further caused issue for the jury to be able to make a fair decision for him. But regardless, he was charged with manslaughter and served 4 months in prison for it. So that's the case. Let's have a look at some of the theories as to why Kay might have made those decisions. So an easy to apply one here again is rational choice theory. The idea that both Kay and Francis Taylor made a risk analysis, and the risk that they might get caught and that there might be a chance that something goes wrong was deemed kind of lower than the reward of checking that the car was working and potentially winning the race the following day. So an easy to apply answer there. But there's also the potential use of the opportunity theory. This is a theory that looks at when opportunity intersects with motivation. And Kay was obviously motivated to try and win the race the following day, and the opportunity arose to be able to try out his car and test it and see if things had improved. These two intersecting creates the opportunity for a crime, and that's why it happened. Finally, we've got the very interesting case of Jack Cottle. Jack, his friend, and his girlfriend had gone in 2014 to see the VW Fun Cup that was taking place at Brands Hatch. They were attending as spectators and had gone in his girlfriend's white VW Polo. And after 3 hours of the 4-hour race, Jack decided that they could get a little bit closer to the action, and he took his girlfriend and his friend down to the car park. They got in his girlfriend's VW Polo, and they were able to drive it onto the track by going underneath the roads and through the kind of tunnels to where they were able to get onto the track. And this allowed them to do one lap with highs of over 100 miles an hour before being stopped. They were quite fortunate in the fact that the large majority of cars on the track that were actually partaking in the race believed them to be kind of the safety car or perhaps a doctor's car, and so were doing a very skilled job of avoiding them as they went round the track, and so there was no incidences there. Jack's friend in the back seat was driving it, and you can watch the video clips, as far as I'm aware, on YouTube, and that posed as evidence in the court case where Jack was given an 8-month stint in prison. They couldn't take his driving licence off him because the incident had taken place on private property, and so it wasn't an appropriate punishment in the kind of sentencing guidelines. So, interesting story here. Again, perhaps opportunity theory works really well. He had the motivation to take part because he was obviously interested in the sport and the opportunity. There was nothing there stopping them being able to drive a car that had been in the car park onto the track, other than some arms that were waving from the pits as they went through them, and some traffic lights which they just ignored. So that obviously provided that intersection of motivation to take part with the opportunity arising to do so. If there had been locked gates, etc., then that opportunity would have been removed, and they perhaps wouldn't have been able to take part in the crime. On the other hand, a particular favourite of some of my students who apply to things like street racing is Marxist theory. And this is the theory that certain things are idealised in capitalist culture, and in this particular case they're arguing that racing and motorsport is idealised in capitalistic culture. These lifestyles, and also the fact that spectators can purchase tickets, are creating this atmosphere of it being kind of a bit of a dream for individuals to want to take part, but it is beyond the reach of the labouring classes such as Jack and his friends. So they have to look for illegitimate ways in which to take part, and things like street racing or car meets and things like that, where you have the revving and stuff like that, might well be an expression of this. They can't afford to take part legitimately, so they then look for ways to take part that are classed as illegal by the ruling classes. Capitalism also encourages individualistic ego and putting self-determination above the risk of harm and things to others, which is definitely something we see in this case because of the risk of harm that it posed to his girlfriend and his passenger, as well as other people on the track, all being kind of put aside by the individual ego of being able to say that he'd done something, and this fits quite nicely with his perspective of you kind of only live once. So an interesting application there, and it's always fun to play about with Marxist theory. So overall, an interesting book. I enjoyed playing about with it and having a read and applying all of these theories to it. Some of the stories that are included do feel like a little bit of a stretch when it comes to an inclusion. They aren't necessarily exactly what I thought the book was going to be. For example, when the crimes are just things that have happened to people who are in motorsport that are in no way kind of related to that, but you can kind of quite quickly flick past those and get onto some of the more interesting ones if that's what you're looking for. It is often more about sponsors and kind of racing teams rather than individuals' behaviours, which does make for, I guess, an interesting thing again for Marxist theory in terms of these companies having to bend the rules and get involved with that individualistic ego in order to partake. But overall, I think it's a pretty interesting read, and definitely one that you can dip in and out of and enjoy. It's definitely one that knows its audience and kind of fits well into the ability to just kind of read little bits here and there. So I hope you've enjoyed my little experimentation with applying the day job to cars and the motorsport scene. If you've enjoyed this, let me know, because there's plenty more stories in that book that I can have a bit of a play about with. And if you've really enjoyed it, you could always look into doing a social science course at a university. But in the meantime, thank you ever so much for listening. Drive safely and happy motoring.